My freshman year of college, my first child was aborted. It was against my will. She let me know that this is what she was going to do and that there was nothing that I could do about it. That began a downward spiral. The result of that was a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, ending in homelessness, unemployment, overdosing in a hotel room and waiting for the police to come and arrest me. Some people, they got to get out of this hang up that dad's the reason mom's getting an abortion. Villainizing men so that you can better serve women is something that we in the pro-life movement should not be taking a part of. 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. Only 38% of women identify as pro-life. So the idea then that men are the driving force behind all abortions is nonsensical. The father is the number one influence in the mom's decision to choose life, and if we are not meeting him, then we are failing to save that child. I believe that young men have been lied to their entire lives. They're being lied to by the left, they're being lied to about family, they're being lied to about secularism, and they are leaving the lies and seeking the truth.
What do you say to people who say a men's ministry is a distraction from their core mission? Welcome back to Pro-Life Unfiltered. Bold conversations for those building the movement. I'm your host, Benjamin Kraft. We're joined by Sean Corcoran. He is the CEO of Men for Life, among other things. Sean, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Benjamin. I appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you popped up on my radar, I want to say beginning of last year, maybe at one of the pregnancy center conferences. We were in an elevator together, I think. I met you and your dad, and lately, I've seen you at everyone since then, and I love that you bring your son. Is it John Michael?
John Francis.
John Francis, that's right.
Yep.
And so he's out there, handing out the tracts at your booth, which I love. I hope my kids will be able to do that too. But how old is he?
He's 11.
11, okay.
Yeah.
So I brought my daughter, she's 3. We were exhibiting at a church, and she's walking in the crowds while people were walking by, and it wasn't like, hey, do you want this? She's walking up. She just says, you want this. And then she hands it to him, and it turns out it's really good lead magnet. So
heck yeah.
So
she's learning sales already.
Yes, exactly. But
They do want it. They do want it.
They
Even
do.
if they don't know, they want it.
Yes, they might not know that they want it, but
that's right.
They need it. That's for sure.
That's right.
But no, I love the concept of incorporating family with kind of your trade, right? They did that thousands of years ago. Your family worked with you. And so it requires some coordinating and sometimes more effort or costs more money to bring your family around places, but I think it's well worth it, and especially in this line of work.
Yeah, and we're really blessed. The school that my kids go to recognizes the value of that over him sitting at school for a week. They recognize that, hey, he's going to learn so much more being in these conversations, being in real life than he would, studying math for a week. He's not going to get behind for sure. But he's gonna learn real life skills, and so it's a really cool opportunity. Tomorrow, I'm taking John Francis and my oldest daughter Zizi with me to an event in Washington State. So it's cool to have a school that is not, super worried about attendance and metrics and whatever else the state tells them education means.
Yeah, as a former homeschooler, I can attest to that, because we spent a fraction of the time in our co-op. We would go take classes together with other homeschoolers like once a week. And so we spent a lot less time in the classroom, but you can catch up really fast. I had to, so I was a little behind in math and ahead in writing. That's kind of a cliche for a lot of homeschoolers.
Right.
But when I dual enrolled in college, I had to catch up quick, and I did. And so it turns out you can learn a lot in much more condensed amount of time. But then the other stuff that they don't teach you in school that you're doing now for your kids is like that real world experience. It's just like eye contact, conversations, handling, tense situations, whatever it is, you learn a lot out in the world. So I just love that what you're doing, with your kids. So tell everyone though, for those that are not familiar with you, just a little bit about your backstory, because you joined Men for Life just a couple of years ago, right?
That's right, 2024.
So what happened before that? What got you into that?
Yeah. So before that, I was practicing law. I and I practiced law for about 10 years. And, and how I got into Men for Life, I'll get to in a second. But after 10 years of practicing law and having two children and then adopting three more, I just got to a point where I recognized that where the most important thing in my life was to be a good husband, to be a good father. I was being a good lawyer, right? And I was very good at that, but I was very bad at separating that or combining it, I guess is a better way to say it, right? I was very bad at being a good lawyer and a good husband and a good father. I wasn't present when I was home. I wasn't present obviously when I was gone, but when I was home, I was just, my mind was always working. And that's not really conducive to being a present father and husband. And so um, it the way that I say it normally is that recognizing that I just quit, which is true, but it came a little bit longer of a process of prayer and conversations with my wife, and God putting some opportunities in the way that allowed me to be able to do that. I certainly didn't just give up on my obligation to provide for my family, um, but we got to the point where, hey, this is clearly not where God is calling me, so I'm going to go find something else that's going to meet the needs of my family and meet the spiritual and emotional and familial needs of my family as well. So um, prior to practicing law, that kind of gets us into how did I get involved with Men for Life. So my freshman year of college, my first child was aborted. It was against my will, as much as I had the ability to say anything. And that's pretty much how it went. I was told that it didn't matter what I said. Um, and I think that sometimes when I say that, it can come across as callous. And I'd like to be clear that there was it wasn't like a fight. It was just matter of factly, um, this is what I'm going to do, and there is nothing that you can do about it. And that was true. There was nothing that I could do about it. And so this is before the internet. To age myself, this is when the internet was somewhere that people went to download music very slowly, right?
Mhm.
It was
LimeWire.
dial-up. And like in my dorm room, my freshman year of college was the first time that I ever experienced Ethernet. Like prior to that, everything was dial-up. And so, and that Ethernet was still super, super slow. And so but all of that to say, there wasn't social media. There wasn't this opportunity for me to find, what do I do? Like type it into Google. Like, what do I do? My girlfriend is going to abort my child. So it was just me in that room in a conversation with her. And she let me know that this is what she was going to do and that there was nothing that I could do about it. And so, that kind of began what I would suggest is a downward spiral in my life, you know, becoming completely emasculated, right? Having all of my masculinity stripped from me, the complete inability to do, the number one thing that I am created to do for the people entrusted to my care, which is to protect them. And, the inability to protect my own child from death, you know, and just being told nothing, there's nothing you can do. And so that began a downward spiral, and it started with my grades, which was compounded when the young lady who also struggled with her grades went and talked to the counselors, and they said, we're going to help you waive your classes because this is a big deal, right? You've gone through a lot. And so she told me this, and I went and talked to the same counselor, told them the same story, said, this is the person. It was the very next day. Like, this is the person you talked to yesterday. This is the situation she described to you. This is the resolution you came to. I'm the other part of that. And they just said, no, like, this doesn't affect you because you're a man. And so that's what I was left with. And it did affect me. And I ended up failing out of college. I moved home. I failed out of another college 2 more times and just began doing anything and everything I could to cover up the way that I felt inside. The result of that was a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, ending in homelessness, unemployment, overdosing in a hotel room and waiting for the police to come and arrest me. And then I went to, by the grace of God, I woke up the next day and made it into treatment. And in treatment, the counselor for the very first time said, "Hey, we should talk about this abortion." And, help me to connect the dots between, all the destructive behavior that I was using to try to cover up the negative way that I felt and what it was that had caused that, so that I could begin to heal. And so she helped me with that to begin that healing process, which allowed me to begin the healing process from the addiction and the other destructive behaviors. And I left treatment, went back to college, went to law school, and started a law career. And then I would say it was about 8 years after treatment, so 16 years after the abortion, on a retreat, was the first time that I ever realized that I was not the only man that had dealt with this, because men don't talk about this, right? Especially, this is now 15 years ago-ish. So men, weren't talking about this. And so on this retreat, all these men were sharing these stories of just the most vulnerable stories that they could share, things that had happened to them, things that they had done, regardless of what it was, just the hardest stories to share. And I noticed that they were being met not with judgment, but with grace. And so I recognized that, hey, I can share like anything. And I did, and I just unloaded everything for the first time. And it was very healing, but more profound than that was that after I shared, I had 3 different men come up to me privately and say, "I haven't told anyone this in 20 years or in 30 years, but, I lost my first child to abortion." And this happens every time I talk. And, sometimes it's men who, like me, fought against it. Sometimes it's men who pushed for it. It doesn't matter. At some point, there's the realization that I failed to protect my child. I failed in my masculinity. And that comes with extreme guilt, grief, regret, shame. And, men just aren't talking about it. And so I recognized at that point that God was calling me to share my story, not for me, but to open the door for other men to know that they're not alone as well. And so that's how I got connected to Men for Life, which has been around since 2018. They heard me share my story. They did a short film on my story a few years before they asked me to come run it. And man, I would say after I posted on Facebook that that I was stepping back from the practice of law to be with my family. I mean, I don't know, it might have been 15 minutes before they called me and said, "Hey, you want to come run this organization?" And it wasn't really that close, but that has to be the only way that they found out that I had the time now. And they said, they just started asking me, "Hey, will you come run this?" And I was like, heck no. Like, there's no way I'm going to run a nonprofit. Like, there's nothing on my radar that says that I know how to do this. I have an idea how much you're going to pay me. And so I'm not going to go run a nonprofit. And for about 18 months, I said no. And then God just like shoved me out the door and said, "You're going to do this." And so that's kind of what brought me into Men for Life.
And that was when?
That was August of 2024.
And it seems like, just from observing on the outside, though, you really hit the ground running. What has that been
I
like?
did.
I mean, you're kind of firing on all cylinders.
So I will tell you that the first 8 months, I kept contacting the president of the board and saying, "I don't understand what's happening. This is the slowest process that I have ever experienced," because I was used to working, 60 to 80 hours a week, and I was like, "Nothing's happening," and really what we had was a podcast. I was just putting out content, trying to interview people and make connections and stuff. And there was nothing else happening. And then, it occurred to me that this is just a business, just like any other for-profit business, except it's not for profit and it's a ministry. And when I started thinking about it like that and thinking like, how would I grow a regular business? It really helped me to put in my mind, Like, here are steps that I need to take.
Like what? What do you mean?
Um, well, like, how do we? So I think that the way that it really happened
Mhm.
was I was at my first conference, which was just over a year ago, last March, last April, at Heartbeat International, and I didn't know anything except that God was going to show me what He wanted me to do, and so I showed up with a banner that had never been used because it was so enormous, and all it said on it was "Men for Life," and then I had a table, like, and I had some materials that had been created over the years, but nothing that I would have been giving out except I had it on hand. And so I just stood there, and I had 104 different pregnancy centers come up to me, and it's actually more than that. But the guy who was helping me at the table was accidentally taking pictures of QR codes instead of using the app. So we don't know how many people he spoke to, but but at least 104 pregnancy centers come up and ask the exact same questions. They said, "Do you have a fatherhood program?" They wanted to know, and by the 15th person, because I mean it was like you've been at these conferences during the breaks, all these exhibitors who had been doing this for years were coming up and saying, "What do you do? Because you have more traffic than anyone else." And all I had was a banner that said "Men for Life." And so after the 15th person, I just started saying yes, like yes, like
It's
clearly
in the
this is what God
pipeline.
wants for me.
It's
Yeah,
being worked on. Yes, we have one
yeah.
coming out
Like
soon.
I am in the process of developing in my head right now how we're going to pull this off. And then the second question was, how do we get the young men to come back after they see the ultrasound? And then the third question was, how do we get men in our community to facilitate these programs? Because we, the women who run the pregnancy centers, recognize that we are not the ones who are going to help raise up men to be men. And so those last two questions gave me the framework around which to build a fatherhood program, because there are fatherhood programs out there, but clearly they were not meeting those two other questions, right? And so taking that and looking at it from a business standpoint and saying, how do I build something that gets the client what they need? And I can look at that and say, if the programs that are currently available to you aren't fulfilling the second one, how do you get them to come back? Then it's not competing with what he wants, right? You have to give like for them, the client's the young man. You have to give the client what he wants. Like you're not going to convince a 19 or 20-year-old man to come back to change a diaper on a baby. I mean, on a doll, for a baby that may be here in 26 weeks with a woman with whom he might not even be in a relationship with, right? Like, like that's not competing with anything.
So how
You
do
know,
you?
that's so what I decided to do was to teach him how to be a man, right? Like this is something that these young men for the most part have never received is is mentorship, fatherhood, like from their own perspective. You know, many of them didn't have a father. They had a bad father. They had an absent father, and so they don't have that influence in their lives. Which gets to the third component, like how do we get the men to facilitate? So using that and using data from the Vitae Foundation, which says that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. Okay. That 97% is the metric that we're trying to meet. So that's the goal. If we're going to meet that, he's already there. He's already in the center. They're getting him into the center by telling mom, hey, bring dad. Right. So he's going to see the ultrasound. So the only thing that is important in that initial meeting is getting him back. To get that 97%, you have to get him back. And not get him back to week 12. You have to get him back to week 1, right? And so in that initial meeting, it's a sales meeting, right? Like that's everything that we do is sales. It's like your daughter walking around handing out pamphlets is sales, you know? It's piquing someone's interest so that they want to come back to what you have. And so framing everything around that, the idea is that in that initial meeting, there are two goals. The first goal is to make a connection with the mentor. And that can be done. I mean, the bar is low, man, because like I said, many of these young men have never had another man pour into them or listen to them. And so if we have a mentor who's willing in that initial meeting to pour into this young man, just let him know that you can live for more than you've ever been told you can live for. You can live for something greater than yourself. You can be more than you've ever been told you can be. And we can show you how to do that here. That's how we get him excited. And then just to make that connection with him to where this is somebody that I want to come hang out with, right? This is someone who I trust can teach me these things, and so I think that's an important thing. But I will say this, every man has the ability to mentor the next generation of men. Like, we've all learned, and a lot of times we get stuck in this idea that I'm not good enough, right? And maybe that comes from not having mentorship in our own life. But the reality is that if we feel that way because we've had failures in our lives, those failures and then stepping out of them is what qualifies us for this. And so, I mean, I know fatherhood facilitators or coordinators who don't even have kids yet, who aren't even married, and they're doing great work because they understand that what their goal is to connect with this young man and to raise him up. And I think that's the number one thing, right? Is just get him inspired to come back to week one. And then on week one, our program, which will be released in beta to a limited number of centers on July 1st, is 12 weeks, but it's based on principles of biblical masculinity. It's based on building the man, right? It's not based on the practical applications of fatherhood. Certainly if somebody says, hey, can you show me how to change a diaper? We should meet them where they're at, because that's important to him. But more important to that is raising up a man who, when that diaper breaks, knows how to just put on another diaper, right? Doesn't get flustered, like understands that, hey, this just isn't that big of a deal. And so, week one is just, what does it mean to be a man? Like, start with the basics and just build on that each week. Build on the relationship between dad and mom. When I practiced law, I practiced divorce, child custody, family law. And one of the things that I recognized was how destructive it is to children when parents aren't able to communicate, or when dad talks bad about mom talks bad about dad, and now they don't have each other to vent to, so they're venting to the children. And I think it's really important whether this young man is going to be in a committed relationship with the mother of his child or not. Like, that's not the goal of my fatherhood program, to promote marriage. Like, that can be part of their conversation if they want it to, but that's beyond what I'm here to do. So, the question then becomes, how do you treat mom regardless of your relationship? Because that little boy is going to watch you, and he's going to learn that this is how I'm supposed to treat women. Or that little girl is watching, and she's going to learn this is how I'm supposed to be treated by men. And that's super important, because you don't have to be married to be good co-parents. I say that, like, I believe that marriage is the best solution. Like, I hated practicing divorce law. I was really good at getting people to go to counselors and save their marriages. But I think that, if they're not going to be married, they need to be able to have conversations and deal with conflict without bringing their kids into it, without tearing each other down. And so that's really the framework that our fatherhood program builds upon, is building good men who are lifted out of the negative communities that they are currently in into a bigger community of biblically masculine men.
I love it. I'm excited for the release too. It's definitely, there's an appetite for it, like you said. I am curious how you juggle that. If you're building this curriculum, how do you juggle that at the same time? You're you're doing a podcast, you're still writing, you're speaking, you're traveling, and you're trying to be as involved of a father as you can, which it helps when you incorporate the kids as you do.
Right.
But for the other pro-life leaders listening, maybe there's something we can learn from this. How do you juggle that?
Yeah, I think that that there's a couple of things. I think that a lot of times as men, and and I'll use the example that was most applicable to me. Okay, so when I stopped practicing law in 2022, I was 300 pounds. I could barely walk around my neighborhood. I'd actually broken my foot and didn't even realize it. I thought I was just like in chronic pain, and and got involved in some coaching, right, which was incredibly helpful. And the coaching was focused not only on fitness, nutrition, but also on masculinity. Um, and and one of the things that they were very clear on all the time, and I think this is really important, is as men, many times we say, "I don't have the time," right? I just don't have time for this. And the reality is, we have just as much time as everyone else. It's what are we prioritizing? Like, what is important to us? I made a conscious decision not to start playing golf when I had kids, because the idea of going and leaving for 5 hours, when I could be spending a portion of that time with my kids is just not appealing to me. And I'm not tearing down people who play golf. I think that's great. I understand that it's really good for networking. That's which is fantastic. But, we have to prioritize the things that are important to us. And so that means removing the things that are not, and we get hit so much with so many distractions in this world, and I mean, and this is the worst, right? Like, everybody can acknowledge that's the worst. And it's even harder when part of what I'm trying to do is put content on that phone, right?
Exactly.
To avoid being sucked into the consumer side of it. And that's one of the greatest quotes that I ever heard is, or the greatest ideas that I ever heard was to be a producer and not a consumer, right? There's enough consumers out there, but do you want to be a producer or do you want to be a consumer? And I think that, I prioritize sleep. I prioritize, my one hobby is going to the gym. I think that if I don't go to the gym for several days in a row, my family will be able to tell, and they will force it on me, because it helps me to have that time to myself. My John Francis has started coming with me a couple days a week, which is really cool. But on the other days, I still need that time to myself, but also to get that stress out, and just be alone with my thoughts. I think is a really important thing. And it's not selfish in the sense that I'm taking, an hour and a half to go do this by myself, because it helps me to be better for everyone else. And I think that it's like putting the mask, the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on your kids, right? So I think that a couple of things to your question are, number one, outlining your priorities and saying these are the things that are most important. And look, it's not a one-time process. Like, it's actually a process that is happening again when we finish this call, because I've gotten to a point where I've got so many invitations to do so many things that I have to sit down and say I can't say yes to everything anymore. I have to say no to things. And so I actually made a conscious effort one day last week to just say no to everything until June, because whatever limited amount of time I have, I'm so used to trying to fill it, and that takes away from my ability to do the things that you were talking about. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is removing the things that aren't helping you to achieve your goal. Like, anything that's not helping you to achieve your goals, whether it's your family goals or your professional goals or your spiritual goals, if it's not helping you to achieve that, then remove it. We don't watch TV, and it's not like I don't have anything wrong with TV. Like, we don't have time to watch TV because the things that we're doing are more important than that. Um,
That's
so
so
I think
true, though.
that's,
Just about saying no to things, how important that is. That's something that took me 4 or 5 years as CEO to figure out because
yeah,
every shiny object, every good opportunity, genuinely good opportunity, I would say yes to, and it's not how it's meant to be. Um,
yeah.
it seems
But the way you
selfish.
just said that is important. Like the way you just said that, because what we're talking about is don't forego the great for the good, right? Like the great being what is it that I see that is going to help me move the needle and leave a legacy that honors God. When I talk about biblical masculinity, what I'm saying is to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to do it all in a way that leaves a legacy that honors God. So the great is what helps us to leave that legacy that honors God, right? Um, but there's so much good. Like there's so much good that we can do, and but if we're doing little good things over and over and over and over and over, but they're getting in the way of us doing the great thing that God has called us to do, that's how the devil gets us, man. Like, it's not always like he doesn't always come in with porn addiction, right? He doesn't always come in with something super negative that we can all look at and say, oh gosh, I got to steer away from that. Like sometimes he comes in with, I'm going to distract you from this amazing thing you're doing for the glory of God with this other thing that you can justify because it's a good thing, right?
Totally.
Um,
Yeah,
and
have you
and
heard
that
of the theory of constraints?
I'm not.
So, the theory of constraints, I, went to Las Vegas to visit acquisition.com headquarters, Alex Hormozy,
Yeah,
and, that they had a room full of CEOs, and the whole first day, they just wanted to drill this one concept into our mind because they found it to be the most important thing. They talked about studies of top CEOs, from, like, McKinsey and these, consulting firms, big time studies, and they found that the number one trait in the best CEOs was resource allocation and constraint identification. And what they mean is, and this is also how Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was picked, even though he had no experience as a CEO, because they said that he had a really good ability to identify constraints and allocate resources. And so the whole theory is basically that you can only focus on one constraint at a time. And focusing on the wrong constraint is worse than focusing on or doing nothing at all, rather. So let me say that again. Focusing on the wrong constraint is worse than doing nothing at all. If you were to just take the next quarter and just do nothing, because what you're doing is you're either breaking something that is already working, or you are taking away resources from the actual thing that you are meant to be focusing on, the actual constraint. And it's been tough, as a discipline doing that, but I've seen the fruit of it in terms of instead of 5 initiatives for this quarter, I just have this one, and I'm just going to do it well. And it might not take up all of my time, and I can fill that extra time with sand and pebbles as long as I've gotten that main thing done. And if I haven't, then sorry, no trips, no meetings, whatever it may be. So that's been something I've been working on even in the last quarter. It's so tough because we fill our schedule with me, at least I'll speak for myself, things that are justifiable, like you said, like, let's just respond to some emails or, you can really quickly fill your day with low value activities that like kind of need to be done, but really ultimately would be okay if they fell through the cracks or got delayed.
right.
And so what would it look like if we were actually just focusing on the things that are, like you said, going to move the needle forward the most? And first you need to assess what's currently holding you back from that growth, from achieving that goal, launching that program. The other thing that's helped has been manager versus maker days. And so different roles require different balance, but essentially, makers are people who create and produce, and they need uninterrupted time. Managers are people who basically their peak productivity is having more meetings. because they're managing people. So a productive manager is going to have a day full of meetings. A productive maker is going to have 0 meetings, and they just produced something. The problem is when you mix the two. Let's say you're trying to create something for the day, but well, we'll just put a couple meetings on the calendar for the day. It actually ends up destroying the whole creative flow because you're anticipating that meeting coming up. Um, and there's a whole psychology behind it. So the practice that is recommended is actually to have a day or two at least where no meetings can be scheduled, nobody can get through to you, and you just have that one thing that you're meant to produce. Today's one of those days.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's, I mean, how many times have you, and I think anyone who's listening or watching can connect with this. How many times have you gone through a day where you have had a full day, like exhausted by the end of the day because you did and did and did and did and did. And at the end of the day, your first thought is, I got nothing done today. And what you mean is, I didn't move the needle, right? I didn't get the things done that are really important to me. And, and I think that, so I think that the other, that kind of really goes hand in hand with the other part of, once you prioritize, um, intentionality. How am I being intentional with my time? How am I being intentional with my relationships? How am I being intentional with my resources? Am I truly being intentional with what it is that I say that I want to do? I actually have, it's funny that you asked that question because here's what I have written on the dry erase board in front of me, and it's been there for 2 years now. And I was actually thinking earlier this week I needed to change it, but there's a couple of things. One thing says, how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's a quote by my coach, one of my coaches, Bedros Keuilian, who he just said that all the time. How you do anything is how you do everything. So, if you're, if you're not organized with your time, during this period, you're not going to be organized. If you're allowing yourself to get distracted from whatever time in the morning, you're going to allow yourself to get distracted throughout the day. If you hit snooze when you have committed to waking up, right? And that's a big thing. That's a thing that he's really big on. If you say, I'm going to wake up at 5 o'clock, and for me, I try to wake up at 4:30 because the kids don't get up until 6. So if I say I'm going to wake up at 4:30 because that gives me an hour and a half to do the things that I need to do, and then I can be intentional with my kids, right? And I hit snooze, then I have failed. Like, I started off my day without a win. Just by not hitting snooze, just by getting out of bed, I have started off my day by being consistent and being in integrity with myself. And so I think that, these little things, how you do the little things is how you're going to do the big things. And then, to answer the question that you have, what I have written is clarity of goals and objectives. Like, you have to have clarity on what are your goals and objectives, then intentionality, then discipline, like even when you don't want to do it, because you've already said, these are my objectives, these are my goals, I'm going to be intentional around it. And therefore, if I don't feel like it, I still have to do it. And then being consistent, and that's how I lost 70 pounds. That's how I, and I think that's an easy way to explain it to people, because everyone understands for the most part, the struggles with diet and nutrition. Like, even people who are in great shape and healthy, like it's something that if you fall out of consistency with, if you fall out of discipline with, you can wake up 6 months down the road and having and be like, wow, what happened?
Yeah. A
But
lot of leaders too, when they are consumed with other things, with work and whatnot, they are the first ones to let themselves, they get the last place. They don't really take care of their
yeah,
health, I've seen in some cases. But what you said about distraction is so, so true. I mean, it's like, I would consider it one of the number one threats to a leader right now in today's day and age. It's so difficult with the news cycles. I've looked back now. I can identify now 3 points in the last 2 years where my where I was most distracted. And it was when Trump got shot, it was when Charlie Kirk got shot, and now it's with the Iran war, which it's tough because in our role, you do need to be aware of some current events and especially in the movement. And then, like you said, you do have to be posting on social media. Granted, I have my assistant do a lot of the posting because I don't want to go into the,
Yeah.
into the trap. Because
That's my first goal. Like
yeah,
as soon as I can afford it, that's the first hire that I'm making.
because like what you said, you want to be a producer, not a consumer.
Right.
But you also, it's a double-edged sword. I've gone back and forth. On the one hand, you want to know what people are saying, you want to know what's going on, what's new. But on the other hand, there's something powerful about just putting your head down and just ignoring the noise, even if it's not all noise per se, but it's just I don't always have to know what another pro-life org or what pro-life leaders are saying. It's not really relevant to my Q1 objective of, saving X more lives, partnering with this many more pregnancy centers, or how is me getting involved in this debate about whatever going to further my 1-year goal for this organization, this ministry. It's not. It's going to take
Yeah.
away from that. I mean, I think I had to bite my tongue just even this past week on one of your own posts. Not because of something you said, but because of a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, it ate away at me. I wanted to get involved so bad, but I knew that if I did, it was going to cost me hours of just thought space.
Was it the bench press one?
And what's that?
Which one was it?
Oh, it was the whole debate about, things going on in the Middle East and Lebanon and
Oh.
dying children
Oh yeah.
and
Like
justification.
it was actually prompted from seeing one of your posts. Yeah.
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 And I'm gonna have a guest on to talk probably about that more so, Jason Jones, who's
Yeah.
the Vulnerable People Project, and he's actually there, boots on the ground, but it's tough. But that in and of itself can be a distraction too. It's
Right.
tough as a justice oriented, like anyone working in the pro life movement typically is gonna be leaning a little bit more towards like justice oriented, where average person would be like, oh, that's a real shame, but they're able to move on with their day. Whereas
Yeah.
then there's this group of people where our full time work is working in a social justice, I wouldn't call it social, human rights, whatever
Right.
cause. And so, yeah, it's tough when you see other things pop up that are unjust in your opinion, like to just not want to comment on those.
Yeah.
It's even worse if you're told that you're not allowed to comment on those things because they're politically incorrect or whatever. And there's a whole lot of
Because
that.
you're a man.
Yeah. I posted a
Yeah.
video of a very sad and unfortunate series of videos of civilian infrastructure and children dying from bombings in Lebanon. And I was called an anti Semite. And I thought,
Yeah.
so we're not allowed to talk about that, I guess. Okay. Instead of debating,
that's
is
what
it
I saw.
right?
Those videos.
You
That's what I
can't
saw was your post,
you
and so I
can't
posted,
gaslight that. Like you
and I went ahead and made sure in my post to write as a disclaimer, I am not anti-American. I am not anti-Israel. I am not anti-Semite. I am not pro-terrorist. I'm just trying to find the answer to the question I'm asking.
exactly.
And it's sad that that's how we have to approach. That's how we have to approach conversations today.
Anything. You shouldn't have to preface that with anything, with any
Right.
conversation. Um, you should be able to just have a debate in terms of what's going on, help me understand that. And yeah. And I appreciate that at least, one of the commenters on your post made a good faith effort to explain his opinion, which was really
Yeah.
good. There was no ad hominem, no accusation. Happens
Right.
elsewhere, but it didn't happen in that case. And I wanted to get
Yeah.
involved, but I had to consciously decide not to because talk about multiple hours, not that it's going to take me multiple hours to respond, but just thinking about it,
Yeah.
that's taking up headspace. And what's that taking away from? It's taking away from the babies that I could be saving through my own ministry,
Right.
because I'm thinking about something else instead. So it's tough. The distraction nowadays, at least for myself, is so risky. Like it's so prevalent, the opportunity for me to waste time here or there. And so
Yeah.
lasering in on that, like what you were saying about what is the priority and what is the focus is very important. Speaking of distraction, that reminds me,
Yeah.
what do you say to people who, when they hear about a fatherhood program, they say, that it is a distraction from their core mission. If in the context of a pregnancy help center, whose
Yeah.
mission is saving lives from abortion. Not all of them are. Some are resource centers. God
Yeah.
bless them too. But others are more so intervention centers. Their explicit goal is to save lives from abortion.
Yeah.
So some of those directors, I've heard them say that a men's ministry is a distraction, or we can't do it all. I think Scott Klusendorf wrote a piece or
Yep.
something about how men's ministries are. It's kind of like an unfair burden that you're placing on pregnancy centers that they can't just be in the business of helping women. They also have to do this other stuff. I don't know what the main thesis was, but
Yeah.
what is your response to
So
that?
so I think that I think that there's a couple of things there. Number one, clarity of goals and objectives, right? What is the goal of the pregnancy center? Because what I've learned is, and I know you know this, is that you kind of just touched on this, that not all pregnancy centers have the same mission, right? So to your question, which is for the pregnancy centers whose mission is to save babies, all right? Um, my initial response is, 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. I've heard varying numbers, but never consistently have I heard numbers that are that high for women who see an ultrasound. I've heard people say 100% of the people who see women who see an ultrasound choose life. That's just not a true statement.
No,
I've heard numbers that are closer to 90, 93, which are probably more accurate.
it's lower.
But is it lower?
It's lower. So it's,
Okay.
they say 80 to 90%, but that's of all women, which is probably
Yeah.
the same stat. It's all men. When you
Yeah.
drill down to abortion minded, it's lower, which the
Right.
jury's actually out on that. People don't have good stats on it. But yeah, it's closer. It's definitely lower for women.
Right. And so so look, and that's a really good point. You bring up all women, and many of the women want the baby, right? And so that's going to skew the numbers. And that can apply to my statistic as well, because you're talking about two things. You're talking about, number one, a man who is willing to go with mom to the pregnancy center to see the ultrasound, right? And is willing to come back. Okay. And so that's a big deal. But from the perspective of what can we control, right? And we can only control what we can control. Who calls and what their perspective is on the moment they call is not something we can control, right? We can control how that conversation goes on our end as we try to get mom and dad into the center to see the ultrasound. We can control what happens when we meet with them and whether or not we are doing the best that we can do to get dad, from my perspective, back for a fatherhood program. Those are the only things we can control. And so looking at it from a business standpoint, and again, I know I've said this before, and I think people get really hung up on sales, right? It gets this bad rap, but we're in business. Like the pregnancy centers, even though they're nonprofits, they are in the business of saving babies. There are KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. There are numbers, metrics that we can use to see how effective we are, and they know this because they read them off at their fundraising banquets, right? So then the question becomes, like, what are we looking at? And if we can control and do the very best we can to convince mom to bring dad, and for some people, they got to get out of this hang up that dad's the reason mom's getting an abortion. Does that happen sometimes? Yes. Villainizing men, so that you can better serve women, like that is third wave feminism at its worst, and is something that we in the pro-life movement should not be taking a part of.
I have seen that. I have
Yeah.
seen that. What
People
are
tell me all the time. They're like, well, no, we don't invite the man because he's the reason she's getting an abortion. That I will tell you, as a man who fought for the life of my child, that is not an accurate way to look at things. And look, I'm going to go off on a sidebar here because I think this is really important. All right. 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. That's based on a Gallup poll from June of 2025. 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. Only 38% of women in that same poll identify as pro-life. Okay. So what that tells us is that based on that poll, Men identify as pro-life at about 20 points higher than women. Okay? So the idea then that men are the driving force behind all abortions is nonsensical. But let's continue down that path. So in addition to that, we can look at an NBC poll from around that same time, sometime last year, and I think it was the end of last year. This NBC poll, what it did was it gave 13 indicators of success. Okay. And then it separated it by gender, it separated it by political leaning, conservative or liberal, and it separated it by age. All right. So if we look at men in this poll, 18 to 29, that's the age group that are going to be coming into pregnancy centers, right? So if we look at 18 to 29-year-old men who are conservative, out of a list of 13 different things as the number one indicator of success, they chose children, right? Women who are conservative chose children as number 4 or 6. I don't remember that offhand. So, but significantly lower than where young men chose it. Now, look at the liberal men and women in that same age group. Same thing. Young men, not number 1, but they chose it at a significantly higher rate than the young women. Young women in the liberal 18 to 29 chose children as number 12.
It was dead last.
That they thought, social media influencer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it was
the only thing they wanted less. And I'm going to be honest with you when I tell you that that's probably a lie. Like some of those liberal young women wanted to be a social media influencer, but they didn't feel comfortable saying that as a key indicator of success.
I saw that stat and that just made me think, one, it was really depressing, but two, this can't go on. I mean, if liberal women rank having children at the bottom of the list of attributes of success, right?
Right.
They're not going to be having children, and who's going to come after them? And so is that ideology dying or is it growing in your opinion?
Well, I think that the liberal ideology is dying out. And I'll get to that in a minute, but to continue down this line, right? Where we say because what I want to just make sure that I'm sticking to this false narrative that men are the driving force behind all abortions, right? Men see children as more valuable than women do. Men are more pro-life in America than women are. And if you say, yeah, but the liberal young men don't view children as number 1, that's fair, okay? But another poll from looking at that same age group, 18 to 29, men, from 2020 to 2024, noted a 7-point shift from the left, from liberal ideology, to the right. Okay, and now we have this study that came out last week that shows that 42% of young men say that church and religion is important to them, which is 14% higher than the year before, like 14% higher than 1 year before. Okay, all of that combined, this is what I believe. I believe that young men have been lied to their entire lives. They're being lied to by the left. They're being lied to about family. They're being lied to about secularism. And they are leaving the lies and seeking the truth. They are leaving the left. They are seeking the right. They are leaving secular world. They are moving to the church. And they are valuing the things that are naturally, biologically more important to us. God has ordained us as men to be the heads of our family. We can't be the head of our family if there is no family. Like we can't sustain this, to the point you just made. We can't sustain a society if we're not having kids, right? They're leaving the lies of abortion isn't murder. They're leaving the lies of it's just a clump of cells, because it just doesn't make sense. And they're tired of being lied to. And they're moving to the truth that abortion kills babies, that moving to the truth that that abortion is wrong. They're leaving the lies that boys can be girls. And I think that's probably what set everybody off. Like there is a point where you get so absurd in your ideology that you are telling people, number 1, that boys can become girls. Boys know they can't become girls. Like that's just ridiculous. And they don't want to be told they can become girls. They're tired of being told that they are the problem, and they want to find the truth. And so all of that to say that these young men, and look, there's bad actors, right? There are men who are abusive. There are men who will use abortion as a tool of abuse and manipulation. 100%. But I do not believe that there is any evidence that that is the norm or the majority. And I think that pregnancy centers need to get out of that and recognize that we know that the father is the number one influence in the mom's decision to choose life. And if we are not meeting him, then we are failing to save that child. And so I think that's what I would say, to the people who are saying, hey, we can't do everything. You're right. You can't do everything. But that's not an excuse, right? That's not like a victimization. Oh my God, we can't do everything. That is, hey, what is the next on our priority list and how can we accomplish it? And I'm going to tell you what I've learned from speaking at banquets. When I start telling people how, at these pregnancy center banquets, how much of a benefit fatherhood programs can be, the men get excited. Men who until that point were only writing checks, right? And I call them out for just being check writers. But like men who are only writing checks are now excited because, hey, for the first time in my entire life that I've been attending pro-life events, I'm being told that I can do something, that I can be of service more than just writing a check so that we can serve women. Like, I can help to raise up young men. Like, that pulls to the heart of a man. Like, you're not only giving the men, which gets that third question, right, from the pregnant or from Heartbeat. The third question, how do we get the men in our community to serve? By telling them, by
Yeah.
calling them, by reminding them, in the way that I always say it, and I'm going to keep saying it until I don't have a positive reaction at one of these banquets. But if we can admit that we are in a spiritual war, abortion is a spiritual war. And if we can acknowledge that 90% of the women, 90% of the warriors fighting this war are women, like 90% of the people on the ground every day in these pregnancy centers are women, and that men, for the most part, have shown up to the pro-life social events, written the checks, and then gone along their way, that if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity. And no man wants to hear that. No man wants to be the check writer to send his wife or his daughters or his neighbors off to fight a war against evil while they sit back and watch football, right? And so calling them to action, and it's not just, hey, men are bad, right? Like, then you give them something to do. And that's, I think, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Like men want to help. I had at one pregnancy center banquet where I was just a guest, she surprised me and said, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to go talk. 3 minutes. Like, by the time I said my name, I had 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. So that was all I could say, was what I just said. 17 men contacted her after that event and said, I want to help you do a fatherhood program. That was
amazing.
literally all I said.
So what I'm hearing from you is, in response, I think, to the original question of it's a distraction, you're saying, no, it's a very powerful tool to help in the baby saving formula that you have of this ministry, right? Your goal is to
100%.
help women choose life for the baby. The fathers are a key role in that. The fatherhood program helps get them on board for that. Therefore, the fatherhood program is not a distraction. It's part of your core mission. Is that
That's
fair to
right.
say?
100%.
And
by promoting it right, by selling, back to sales, by selling it to the community who is supporting you, you can find the money to be able to fund it, and you can find the manpower, literal manpower, like men coming to help, who can run it. And so it's not a, hey, we can't do this because it's just, too hard. No, you probably can't do it with the resources, with the time, with the people that you have right now, right? The question then becomes, how do we get that so that we can meet our goal?
one thing that I just wanted to point out when you were talking about the trend that I've noticed as well of, like, young men returning to the faith, becoming more Christian, leaning more conservative, leaning more pro-life, which is an amazing trend. And the question is why. And I do agree. One of those reasons would be just the craziness of the gender fluidity phenomenon, we'll call it.
Yeah.
Another one I think is there is a feeling that I'm just going to describe as a younger, millennial father myself that I've seen my friends as well. And it's that as we have been having children, it feels countercultural and it feels like we are warring against this culture that one is on a massive scale shaming men just in general, right? They might call you just being overly sensitive, but the fact remains one of the most hated figures in the United States is to be a white male, right? They are
Right.
just a target. But when you have children, it's kind of fighting against that, which is, they want you to be complacent. They want you to shut up. They don't want you having kids, right? And I love this quote. I believe it's G.K. Chesterton, but it says that the most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man and his ordinary wife and their ordinary children. And that's literally what it feels like. It feels extraordinary in today's day and age to be raising children in this environment, knowing that, quite frankly, there are powerful forces that hate us as Christians, that hate us as a Western society, that, quite frankly, don't want us having children. There are people out there, the eugenics movement is alive and well. They think
Yes.
there's too many people out there. And if there are going to be people, well, hopefully they're liberal or they are. And it's not just a political thing. I think it is just a deeply demonic, anti human trend.
100%.
And so more and more men, I think, are seeing that. They're seeing that, um, ironically, they're starting to feel like an endangered species. And they're like, oh my gosh, I need to have a family because that's the number one thing. A lot of people say that why would you bring a child into this world? It's so evil, it's so dark. And I would say that's exactly the reason why you should, because nothing better to fight against that culture than to raise children up that do believe in biblical values and are going to carry Jesus with them into this world. And so that I think is also a big reason why we're seeing this trend.
I agree. No, I think you're right. I think that that's a really important point too.
So before we wrap up, I did want to ask you about this article that you wrote after the March for Life earlier this year, because you are newer to the movement stepping in and you made some critical observations that I
Yeah.
think were pretty accurate and pretty needed. And you were just touching on some of the division in the movement, which I'll get out ahead before we even get into it and just say I don't think is all a bad thing. I'm not. I think we were just talking with my last guest, Savannah, about this topic and how conflict is not inherently bad, and the slogan "We're all on the same team" is used way too much. But you did talk about the infighting and how problematic it is. And so I want to know what you meant by that, but I also
Yeah.
want to understand the balance of that, of the infighting and slander versus iron sharpening iron.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that before I finish this thought, that we talk about what you just said, that we're all on the same team, how that's overused. Because I agree, and I've kind of come to what I think is an interesting conclusion. It might be something everyone else has always realized, but I'll share it anyway, as though it's profound. So, so here's what I recognize at the biggest point. Okay, so I went and gave a talk at the Leadership Institute in the March for Life event, the Pro Life Leaders Summit here. I think it was called the Pro-Life Leaders Conference, something like that, the day before the march. And it was like at 10 o'clock. And I gave my talk, and as I always do, I pointed out John Francis, who is also trained as a videographer and was videoing my talk. And I pointed him out, and I said, something to the effect of, if we as men lead in this fight, then his generation will see this as normal, right? That it's normal to be pro-life. That of course they won't see any other option. His generation of young men, and that is how we will change the culture, and that is how they can end abortion, right? I put it off on him, and it wasn't like I'm putting it off on my son because I don't want to do it. It was, this is a long process. Changing the culture doesn't mean anything, but it's something we always say. We always say we have to change the culture. There's zero timeline on change the culture. Like that is something we need to do. That's not a solution that we can quantify or look at metrics and say, how much have we changed the culture this week? And so, like, at what point have we changed the culture? Well, we've changed the culture when we end abortion. Well, how do we end abortion, right? So
Gotta change the culture.
Yeah.
Circular
So
logic.
exactly. So the problem with that is it perpetuates a cycle of endlessness. And so I say that, and then we left that event and we went over to the Life or Death Con that Seth Gruber and the White Rose put on. Victoria Robinson, who's on my board of directors, was speaking at that. So I wanted to go over there and support her. And Abby Johnson spoke. And I will say this, the week before the march, Abby Johnson started putting out videos because the administration had released funds back to Planned Parenthood and nobody said anything. That's where her frustration came from. Not just that it happened, but that where was the pro-life movement standing up against the fact that this, like, why was nobody talking about it, was the point of what she was saying. And but she drew some battle lines, right? And so then I go and I hear Abby Johnson speak. And Abby Johnson said something that I've never heard anyone say, and maybe just because of the way she said it with conviction that day. But she said, I don't want my kids to fight for this. I don't want to end abortion in 20 years. I want to end abortion today. And I think that's really important because every single person in the pro-life movement should want to end abortion today. Will we end abortion today? Doesn't matter. In our fatherhood, not my fatherhood coaching program, but in another program that I'm a part of, we always talk about how perfection is the goal always. It's unattainable, but perfection is the goal. Like every day, the goal is to be the perfect father, the perfect husband. It's not attainable, but that doesn't mean because it's not attainable, we use the unattainability as an excuse to not try to achieve it, right? It's always the goal. So I want to end abortion today. And I just sat there and I was like, man, well, I want to end abortion today. Like, I just tried to put this off on my 11-year-old. Like, what, how crappy is that? But here's what was crazier. So I got my dad with me, who's, been pro-life as long as I know. When I lost my first child, he drove 9 hours to where I was in school and met with the young lady's mom and offered to adopt the baby. And then, he does pro-life work here in Louisiana where I live separately from anything that I do. And he's retired. Like this is just something that's very important to him. And he's been donating to these national and local organizations for ever, right? He's the normal $20, $30, $50 a month donor that all these national organizations are getting, right? And so he's watching and she ends and he's like, wait a minute. Like the organizations that I've been sending all my money to don't want to end abortion today. Like they're not actively working to end abortion today. They are sometimes being objecting to things that may potentially end abortion today. And just watching his wheels turn. And this is what was really important to me, watching his wheels turn and having these conversations with him, and he's very introspective. Like it it was conversations, like trying to work through this and figure it out. And then he read all the books, that we could find while we were in Washington. And and he's thinking through all this. And so I went the next day to the march, recognizing that there are normal donors to these national pro-life organizations that think that the money that they are sending is for the purpose of doing anything and everything that we can possibly do to end abortion today. And if they learn that that is not always the goal, they're going to move their money, right?
What do you think is the goal when it's not that?
That's a question I'm trying to get answered. So I'll share with you like how I'm trying to get that answered. But that is a question that I'm trying to get answered. I did try to get connected with National Right to Life, so somebody with them could participate in the podcast series I'm doing. That's what ended up happening is I started a podcast series called "What Should the Pro-Life Movement Want?" to try to invite different perspectives on to answer that question. I am someone who believes in the best in everyone, right? So I do believe that they want to end abortion today, but they don't have a solution. Is the problem that I have? Is
Yeah.
that they're fighting against a solution that may be effective because they don't like what it means, but they aren't offering up an alternative solution to end abortion today.
Yeah. I get what Abby's saying, and I have a lot of empathy towards that. And I would tell her this too. I think maybe where it might not be as helpful is getting into the business of why people are doing what they're doing and assuming their motives are, make a ton of money or something like that.
100%, I
There's
agree with you.
definitely people out there that is their motive. Okay,
Yeah.
so she's not wrong about that. But is it helpful to spend time talking about the motives versus just I'm all for calling out terrible strategy. Like
Yeah.
not ad hominem, but just, hey, this is a really important topic. This is my perspective. This is why I think what you're doing is counterintuitive, if not destructive to the movement. And let the best voice, the best argument win. Instead
Yes.
of, oh, we're all on the same team.
Yes.
People conflate, this is completely different. People conflate critiquing this strategy or tool or what have you of a pro-life individual or group with attacking them personally and infighting. And those two
Yes.
things are not the same. They're not the same. The whole point of competition, right? That's a great part, right? Actually viewing each other as competition is okay if you're not using it to tear each other down, but to call each other to higher standards. It's like, hey,
Yep.
donor, you could give to this org, you could give to my org. Let me tell you how I'm going to save more lives per dollar when you give to my organization. The movement and babies benefit with that kind of mentality, I would say.
Yep.
Now, don't get me wrong. I also believe in an abundance mentality. And so the practice of, I'm on the board for another pro-life nonprofit, Let Them Live, and we swap donors all the time. We introduce each other to donors. That was something that the Burnings taught me early on that they really exercised and lived out was that, hey, the pro-life dollars, the potential giving is so untapped. And so instead of looking at this finite amount of pro-life donations can only go and, if I'm going to get a donation, it's coming from someone else. That's not the way we look at it.
Right.
The whole idea is that everybody has different strategies and ideas and vision, and we've barely scratched the surface on giving. So I don't say that to say a scarcity mentality is better, but still being competitive. That's why monopolies are illegal. Granted, there's plenty in the United States, but they're illegal because it hurts the consumer. Same thing with the pro-life movement. Increased competition leads to being better and more effective, and then you have to demonstrate to the donors why. It's a serious
Yeah.
question. I can think of examples like here in Michigan where you have legislative groups that really don't have anything to point to in the last couple of years of what they've done. They're still getting a lot of donations from kind of what you're talking about with the longtime donors, will say, that I really do wonder 10 years from now, what are they going to do when all the 80-year-olds and 70-year-olds that are their core donor base are gone?
Right.
They're going to have to start proving to the next generation of pro-life givers that they're actually being effective with those dollars.
Yeah, and look, and here's what I would suggest is even more important. Like it, because that's a really good thought. Like if you've only got 10 years, like get it done. Like get it done. You know, how do we get it done? And that's the answer. And so I went to the March for Life the next day, and you know, and I was standing right next to you. You know, so I want to be clear that this wasn't like there wasn't like all this abundance of gossip going on, right? It was just a couple people mentioned, you know, they weren't even really talking about it. They're just being dismissive of Abby and her perspective. And then I know that she was uninvited to some things. She was silenced. And in my mind, all I was thinking was, as I was listening, was you guys are missing it because I'm seeing it and the impact that it's having on other people, on older donors. And so I think you're missing part of this. And so I just wanted to open up the conversation. I don't believe in silencing people, which is what you said, right? With your conversation with Savannah, that that having that conflict of conversation, you know, is important to getting to the solution. That's what Charlie Kirk did, right? It's important to invite all of the voices in so that we can have the conversation if we're ever going to change minds. And it might be my mind that's changed, right? That's a big part of it. Not, hey, I'm going to invite you in so that I can change your mind. You know, it might be my mind that has changed as well. And so to really just invite these people in. And so I had a conversation with Daniel Breeden, with Tennessee Right to Life, with Abby Johnson, with AJ Hurley, with the White Rose. You know, I've had several more today. After we finish this, I'm releasing Bradley Pierce with the abolitionists, you know, and it's not because I agree with all these people. It's that I think that if all the voices come out in a healthy conversation, then people can make their own decisions on what they think, you know, and so I think that I think that's important. But I think that what you said is really important too. Like what are we paying attention to? Are we paying attention to what is the ultimate goal, I guess? You know, I think that that's the question. And I know we're out of time, but just to touch on the one thing of you know, we're all in this together, right? I think that this is important because as these conversations came out, especially, you know, end of January, beginning of February through March, when it was a really big deal, so many people in the pregnancy center movement weighed in on these laws, on these bills. And I would suggest that there are at least two different movements in the pro-life movement, right? The pregnancy center movement exists to serve the moms, to serve the babies, to serve the families, to serve the dads as well, right? The pregnancy center movement exists to save the one, right? To save that one baby and to raise up those families. The pregnancy center movement does not exist to end abortion. That is not to say that people in the pregnancy center movement do not want abortion to end. They do, right? But that is not their ultimate goal. And that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. What is the clarity of your goals, your objectives, your mission? It is not the mission of pregnancy centers to end abortion. Likewise, the people who are out here trying to end abortion, it is not their mission to serve those families, to serve that mom, to save that one baby. Do they want all of that to happen? Yes. This is where the conflict has come, and it's kind of crazy because we're talking about two different things and trying to conflate them. And the reality is there are two different things going on. And I think that a big part of that is that some of the voices in the let's change the laws, the equal protection laws, just to put it out there, is really what I'm talking about. Some of those voices have been really antagonistic of the pregnancy center movement.
100%.
And that creates.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, I think you've touched on, you're on the right track. So there's different segments, we'll call them, different verticals of the pro-life movement, right? There's
Yeah.
policy, there's public opinion, and there's apologetics, and there's pregnancy help. We would call it demand side, right? There's several more. There's abortion loss and, you know,
Yes.
counseling, grief, all that stuff. A lot of different lanes. We're spending a lot of time, these people in this one other lane, criticizing these people in this other lane. That doesn't seem very beneficial. Quite frankly, I'm more disinterested in this whole debate. Like every single guest who has come on this podcast so far,
Yeah.
when I ask them what conversation are we avoiding in this movement, they all want to talk about this equal protection stuff. And quite frankly, I am bored of it and I'm disinterested in it. You know why? Because I don't work in law and policy. Okay, so the
Yes.
people who are passing laws, yes, that should be taking place. Also, just side note, I think it's just silly having those conversations, debating so fiercely when we can't even defund Planned Parenthood right now. So why are you talking about like good luck with those laws? Okay, we can't even
Yeah.
defund them right now. So all this right now, forgive me, but it seems a little bit hypothetical. But I would like to see more of people in the same lane critiquing or challenging on best practices within their lane, right? I
Yes.
could speak a whole lot about the pregnancy help movement and some practices that are effective and some that are not. That's my area of expertise. I have the right to speak into that, and I have some very strong opinions about that. Quite frankly, I don't know the ins and outs of lobbying and passing laws and this, that, and the other thing. So I'm just going off of what those people are saying. So yeah, if you want to comment on it, that's totally fine. But I think the movement will actually benefit when we can have these conversations within our lanes. And that's actually, I think, beneficial because we actually know what we're talking about in that case. And I could debate whether or not it's good to delegate your communication at your pregnancy center to a third party or do it in a house, right? I have thoughts on that. But that's a niche within a niche. Does that make sense though? Versus
Yeah.
instead, we're jumping from here to this totally other different area. And it's that classic verse about all the different arms and legs and parts of the body. They're all necessary. But so yes, you need all these parts, but there is, let's say, in the category of the hand, right? There's maybe more or less effective strategies to be, how can we be the best hand for the body? Or the
Yes.
eye, right? Who's the best eye and why? I want to know that. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. No, I think that 100% makes sense. And that's kind of where, it's been important to me to have these conversations. I wanted to separate out the pregnancy centers on purpose because not because they don't want to end abortion, but because I think they have been maybe pressured, maybe they feel pressured to protect mom and they're not recognizing that that's their job, but that doesn't mean that they have to be against what these people are doing. It's such a hard conversation to try to shove into the next 30 seconds, but what I've been trying to do is navigate these conversations because I think that there is a portion of the policy part which has been incredibly aggressive and ineffective and has been reaching over in their conversations, and that the reason that they aren't making any headway is because of the way that they're approaching it. And I think that not only that, but it's driving away people who may even agree with them in principle, but don't like how they're handling it, right? And so I think that if we can bridge that gap and bring people back to, hey, let's have these conversations. Like we're not actually in opposition with each other. I think that we can end abortion. And
Yeah,
I think
you're
we can
talking
end it
about
in
the
the
way
next
it's
5
being
years.
said and how it's maybe not being received in the best way possible, or they're turning away people that might otherwise agree with them. Um, the way I like to put it is, I'll just say it bluntly.
Yeah.
I think one of the number one hurdles that's holding back the cause of the abolitionists is the
Yes.
abolitionists.
100%.
It's just, come
That's
on,
exactly
like
what I'm trying not to
you're
say.
you're
You're right.
stepping on your own foot.
Yes.
But no, I've seen that. I've seen abolitionists shame pregnancy centers and say, if you don't tell your clients that abortion is murder, you're not really pro-life. You're a fake clinic. They call them fake clinics, fake pregnancy
Yes.
centers.
You know who else
They
calls them fake
accuse them of
clinics?
being
Planned
pro-choice.
Parenthood.
What's that? Yeah,
Planned
Planned Parenthood.
Parenthood
They're
calls them
using the same
fake
talking
clinics.
points as Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
The fact is, they have no idea that we've already thoroughly exhausted the talking points statistically, and we know that if you say X, you're going to have a X percentage of life decision rate versus if you say Y, if you call them murderers, they're going to choose life at a lower rate. And so, are you here to save lives from abortion? Or are you here to be right? If what's most important to you is just saying the truth at any
Yes.
cost, then there's something flawed there. Okay. If a woman is holding her baby hostage and pointing a gun at it, and you are the person whose job it is to talk them out of that, there's a reason we have people that negotiate in those
Right.
situations in the police, right? There's a way to
Yes.
talk to someone who's in that life or death situation. And the same is true in a pregnancy center counseling room. And so, sorry, but I really don't care what some abolitionist thinks about what I should be saying in the counseling room to a woman who's about to abort her child. I'll rely on the stats and
Yes.
I'll rely on the Holy Spirit, not someone who's never even stepped foot in that room.
That's right. That's 100%. Like that's what I was avoiding saying. I appreciate you coming out and being blunt with that because I think that is the issue is that the abolitionists are getting in the way of the abolitionists. And I've got, um, you know, like there's so much information on that we can't really get into today. But I think that and what you just said, I think is exactly what I said to Bradley Pierce. If I didn't, it's what I was trying to get to is, our marriage counselor, who we started seeing before we were even engaged, would always say it was the best thing. He would say, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You know, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Because we can fight to the death to be right and be incredibly miserable, right? Or if we want to be happy, and in this instance, what would make us happy? Ending abortion. Well, if I piss off 50 to 70% of the people who would otherwise be on my side because I am just drilling into them that they are not really pro-life, then I'm not going to be able to be effective in ending abortion. And I think that is where they are at today. And so, I think that I didn't really get a clear answer on whether they want to be happy or right. I think they want to be right because, and this is where part of the problem comes from. They want to be right because they believe that they are moving with the obligation from biblical obligation from God. Therefore, it doesn't matter if they're happy as long as they do what's right. It doesn't matter if they end abortion today as long as the tactics that they've used today fall into what they believe is God's command to them, right? And anyone who's doing anything different is not working within God's command. And so that's where the hang up comes, because I think that God commands a lot of things, right? And he gives a lot of guidance. And there's a lot of ways that Jesus Christ navigated unhealthy conversations with the other side, right? In a way that made it a healthy conversation, that, it wasn't just smash mouth. But in fact, if anything, when Jesus was communicating with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right, he was opposing smash mouth biblical or Torah or whatever obligations, law, smash mouth law, right? And so I think that it's very narrow minded, to look at it like, hey, I'm the only person that God has ordained to be able to do this work, and therefore the way that I'm doing it is the only way to do it. And if you are not doing it the way that I'm doing it, then you are wrong, and I will call you out.
Yeah, and you're not just wrong, but you're in it for the money. And I'm
And
going
you're
to
not
find 10
pro-life,
more motivations for why you're
right?
doing it.
And you're not pro-life.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's a lot of valid arguments, I think, and some great points. And ultimately, yeah, we do need to treat abortion for what it is. Um, it's killing, it's murder. Though you can make an argument that murder is illegal killing, and if abortion is legal, then it's definitely killing. But regardless, there's points there, and I think that they need to be fleshed out, and I think there's some truth in that. I just, I hope that we can. I think that movement is not going to go anywhere until it is not primarily, seemingly, just from an objective observation, driven by people who care more about being right than they do about the results at the end of the day.
Yep.
Um, I've seen that play out again, where they don't care the result, right? If we know that telling that woman it's your it's a it's murder, don't do that in the counseling room at a pregnancy center. If you don't care if how she's gonna respond, and the priority to you is just speaking the truth, regardless of the
Right.
cost, then you've shown me where your motives are. And so if we could get away from that and separate the ego, I think that the abolitionist movement actually does have, fruit ahead. I think that they could succeed in their endeavors and convince large portions of this population to their viewpoint. But you have to separate the ego.
Right.
Not everybody has an ego in that movement, but objectively speaking, there's a problem there.
The movement as a whole does.
I mean,
Yeah.
mankind does, right? We all do.
Right.
There's a lot of ego in the pro-life movement too.
And ego is connected to pride, and pride is the idea that we are moving in accordance with God's will, and if you're not moving in the exact way that we are moving, then you are not moving in accordance with God's will. Is a prideful way to look at this.
Yeah.
And I would hope that we could acknowledge that pride is not the way to go.
Perfect way
So,
to end it.
I mean, that's a heavy conversation. It's a heavy way to end this.
No, I think we
it's
solved it.
important.
We solved the whole thing.
We did. If only people decide they want to be happy. Hey, man, it's like 2 days after this comes out, the entire pro-life movement's going to move away from being right into being happy, and abortion will be over by December.
By December, that's the hope.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you for coming on. How could people learn more about your fatherhood program if they want to bring it to their pregnancy center?
I think you can email me at sean@menforlife.org. Like I said, there is a limited space for the I don't think beta testing is the way that I'm really been saying it, but I can't think of pilot program for the rest of this year starting July 1st, and then we'll open it up much more broadly on January 1st. But they can email me at sean@menforlife.org. You can go to our website, which is menforlife.org. And there's actually a video on our YouTube page outlining the fatherhood program, the 12 weeks. So they can go there.
And I hope they'll consider you too for a keynote.
Yeah. And look, I do want to point this out because this is coming out, I think you said sometime this summer. We are teaming up, Men for Life is teaming up with Tennessee Right to Life to hold a pro-life men's conference September 12th in Nashville. And, I think we've got Nick Freitas has agreed to be the headliner, and it'll be a day of, there'll be some worship music, but, primarily some great speakers really calling to the heart of biblical masculinity and the connection between biblical masculinity and the obligation to protect life. And so that's September 12th in Nashville, and more information will come out on that. As it becomes available, we'll start promoting it pretty heavily.
Sounds great. Looking forward to that. Sean, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, sir.